Right now, Illinois officials are holding part two of what has already been an emotional and chilling hearing detailing the aggressive tactics of federal agents during Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago. While that major immigration push was months ago, the horror of what unfolded there still haunts American citizens who had to see their friends and neighbors ripped away.
I saw for myself the masked agents. I watched them throw tear gas unprovoked on those of us standing nearby. I saw their hands flinch on their weapons, threatening us for simply holding our phones. As they drove away, I saw the shadow of my neighbor, a terrified Chicagoan, in the backseat of their car.
They were dressed as though they were ready to go to war. And I think I frequently asked them if that's what they were preparing to do, was to go to war against the citizens of my neighborhood.
MS Now's Nnamdi Egawonwu is following the hearing for us. I also want to bring in MS Now contributor Paola Ramos and immigration attorney Alan Orr. Thank you all for being here. Nnamdi, what's come out of these hearings so far?
Well, for one, Chris, just a lot of powerful testimony. A big focus of this hearing, according to local officials who helped organize it, was giving voice to some of the residents and community members that were directly impacted by Operation Midway Blitz, which was that federal surge of ICE and other immigration agents to Chicago and Illinois, the Midwest writ large, last fall. Now, these hearings have really been set up around this idea that the administration gave federal agents 3 directives that were unlawful in their origin. Those directives included to militarize the streets, to suppress free speech, and to also immunize lawlessness. And in order to sort of paint that picture, they've had really powerful testimony from people like Denise Lawrence. Her daughter was Katie Abraham. She actually was the 20-year-old Illinoisan that was killed in a drunk driving accident that involved an undocumented immigrant that Operation Midway Blitz was launched in honor of. That's not according to me, that's according to the Department of Homeland Security, who in a release directly named Katie Abraham in justifying this. Well, her mom, Denise Lawrence, testified yesterday about how damaging the use of her daughter as essentially the face of this operation was. I want to play for you some of her remarks.
Operation Midway Blitz was never about dangerous crimes. It was about creating fear among communities and dividing people. I can say with confidence, Katie would have hated it. And she would have hated having her name continuing to be used by politicians publicly and on social media. The Trump administration preyed on her name and used it in a vile way.
Now, I will point out that the Trump administration did get permission from Katie Abraham's father, but her mother, as you heard, pointed out that she was never contacted and feels that she wasn't considered by the administration as they've continued to use Katie as sort of the de facto face of this operation that has been volatile and at times very violent. What we're expecting to hear today, I will note, is testimony from Miramar Martinez. If you recall, she was actually one of the Illinoisans that was shot by immigration agents last fall. She will be talking about her experience and, again, talking about the lasting impact that operation had on her neighbors, and residents of the state writ large. Chris.
Nnamdi, thank you for that. So, Paola, I want to play for you how another woman described what it was like to see ICE agents operating in the streets.
This was especially traumatic for me because in 2021, some friends and I were robbed at gunpoint in a very similar manner. People jumping out of cars in masks and threatening us with guns. At that time, I called 911 for help, but this time, when it happened at my home, I couldn't call 911 because the people responsible were law enforcement agents themselves.
Talk, Paola, about the overall lasting impact the Trump administration's immigration operations have had on the residents of these communities who I know you've spoken to.
Yeah, I think because we're not seeing the raids the way that we were 2-3 months ago, and we do have to remember that there's a type of damage, the type of wounds and scars that cannot be undone, that you can't unsee. And I'm not just talking about people like Marimar Ramirez, that's about to talk, people that were shot 5 times. I'm not just talking about all of the protesters that also endured these physical wounds. There's also this invisible trauma that persists and that is overshadowing the thousands and thousands of immigrants that are in Chicago and everywhere across the country. A type of trauma, Chris, that prevents you from wanting to leave your house. that prevents you from wanting to go to church, that doesn't even allow you to take your child to school because you're so scared. It's a type of trauma that suddenly you find yourself in your home. And I've spoken to those families that don't know where their husband is. They're suddenly disappeared, detained, deported. And that's exactly what Trumpism intends to do, to inflict so much pain and trauma in these families that you're suddenly wrestling with this impossible scenario. Do you withstand it? Do you sort of live in the shadows? Do you succumb to not living with dignity, or do you go? Do you self-deport? And I also do want to point out that this type of trauma, Chris, does not live in a void. It builds on generational trauma that a lot of these immigrant families are carrying from their homelands. People that have experienced violence and repression and police brutality that suddenly find themselves in a country looking around at American cities that look and sound familiar, familiar to the repression that they lived in Venezuela, familiar to Pinochet's Chile, familiar to the civil war that they escaped in El Salvador. And I think that's the image, that suddenly America is reminiscent of the homeland that you fled.
Ellen, just last week on this program, we shared the story of an 85-year-old French widow who was taken by ICE after her husband, a war veteran, died. After she was deported to France, she described to the New York Times what it was like to be in ICE custody. Here's what she said. She said she was taken in her bathrobe, chained by her wrists and ankles to other inmates, and loaded onto buses and a plane like a potato sack. After 2 weeks in detention in Alabama and Louisiana, she said she feared she might die. Again, this was someone married to a U.S. veteran. Is that indicative of what's still going on with immigration enforcement in this country?
I think the Chicago story, the Illinois story, is more indicative of everything in all the situations. Don't forget California, don't forget Minnesota, don't forget Utah. There's a continuum of happening of violating the law and constitutional rights of United States citizens as well as immigrants. So we can expect this to happen. This year, we've already had 17 people die in detention. That's unheard of. And that's with a $17 billion budget that ICE has. So these advancements towards removing the protections of United States citizens, the goal of just potentially finding some maid that might be undocumented, is unwarranted. And these stories are building a record that could later be enforced in court, but it does not remove the damage has already been expressed. So it sends a message to people who are in this country that their place is, and it runs them underground and starts the fear of enforcement. So we've heard the conversation today, they want to rename ICE NICE. Even renaming the situation won't remove the damage that has happened to these individual communities.
Yeah, some people may not have heard that, Paolo. The president endorsing the idea to change the name of ICE to National Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or NICE. In fact, look at this picture that the White House posted. It's like a throwback to, little kids who were in their neighborhood, and, the good guys would come, to protect them. He's got it. You can see his hand on the child, but near the border. What are you hearing about this rebranding? I mean, if ICE agents' actions are still the same, then what does it do?
Look, I think that's kind of this overshadowing question that everyone is wrestling with. Can you reform ICE? Is there a way to sort of control and restrain this paramilitary force that has been unleashed, right? Like, how do you get an ICE agent that saw someone like Marimar as a domestic terrorist? How do you get that agent to see her as a human? Or how do you get an agent to suddenly see Liam Conejo Ramos also as a human? How do you see them to look at their operation and the billions of dollars that they have in their hands, and to understand that their job is about public safety, that it's not about a military invasion? I think that is kind of the question that a lot of these politicians in Chicago are talking about really openly. Is it time to abolish ICE, or can you fundamentally reform it? And I think anyone that has been exposed to that reality, not to the fear mongering and to the fabricated lies and to whatever their president is tweeting online, if you have been exposed to it, I think the answer is very clear. That there's something fundamentally wrong and rotten about these agents that have been driven by resentment and by fear and by anger. And so the question is, how do you stop it, and can you stop it?
So there's another layer to this that, Alan, applies directly to you. The Washington Post reports that Trump officials are ramping up hiring deportation judges because they've got this huge backlog. They're offering new recruits signing bonuses, the opportunity to work as a judge from home, and even the flexibility to keep their day jobs and moonlight as judges after hours. According to the Post's analysis of the DOJ's hiring announcement, 2/3 of the new judges have zero experience practicing immigration law. How could this impact what you're seeing in court every day, where a line of defense has at times been the judiciary?
So let me start with this. The Trump administration has basically broken the immigration system completely, legal and the undocumented processing system, and called it success. They've already fired 100 judges because they did not like the way they were making judicial decisions. And this is a problem with the immigration court, that it's not a separate court from the Department of Justice. So there is no justice here. Calling them a deportation judge is telling you exactly what they're being hired to do, which is to remove officials and to remove immigrants without even giving them a court date. We've seen this happen in Minnesota to a ton of Somalians who were not even given a date in court to have their hearing for their asylum case before they were removed from this country. This is something where Congress should step in. Congress has the purview to stop this injustice in immigration because immigration is under their control. Right now, they've given everything to the executive branch and is deny, remove, and demonize immigrants across the board, when in fact we found from the Cato that immigrants actually pay more in the system than they take from the system. And many of the immigrants that support the Trump administration, such as Cubans, are being deported at record rates right now. So the system is void of justice right now. And we need to rethink the way we're doing this, starting with removing the immigration courts, but more importantly, questioning these immigration judges that are being appointed. And the only people that can stop this is Congress.
Well, let me just make one more point. Again, reporting from the Washington Post that one of the new judges who was hired is a divorce lawyer who had vowed to fight exclusively for the rights of men. Nnamdi Egawanu, Paula Ramos, and Alan Orr, thank you for a very important discussion.